Our next talk is Embracing User-Generated Content. Please welcome Tom Bowie from Valve.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tom, as Chet said, and I'm a programmer at Valve Software. Today, I'd like to talk to you about embracing user-generated content. Briefly, these are the high-level points I'm going to talk about today. I'll go over what UGC is and why it's important. I'll run you through some examples of games on Steam that have integrated UGC in interesting ways. I'll talk about how easy it is to get started, and then I'll discuss some ideas to reward content creators, ensuring that the best possible content will be exposed to your players. So, what is user-generated content exactly? Most of you probably know what UGC is by now. There have been dozens of presentations over the years that have covered user-generated content in one way or another. Back in 2009, an old coworker and dear friend, Chris Hecker, gave a talk at GDC entitled Meaning, Aesthetics, and User-Generated Content. In it, he laid out two axes for categorizing UGC: aesthetics versus behavior, and parameterization versus creation. To simplify things a bit, I'd personally define UGC as any kind of content that your users create that is related to your game. For this presentation, we'll spend most of our time focusing on content that your game can consume, such as maps or levels, characters, cosmetic items, gameplay mods, etc. One of the things I strongly believe is that UGC is an ongoing service. It's an ongoing service to your players. It's a service that is supported both by you and your community. It's a vision of your game that is not bounded by the amount of time and resources you have. Games as a form of entertainment have always been about player choice. Otherwise, we would be no different than other forms of media, such as books or movies. And UGC is an incredibly powerful way to give customers an unbelievable amount of choice and let them shape how they want to play your games. Here at Valve, we have a unique perspective on UGC. Some of our most popular game franchises started off as mods of other games. Counter-Strike started off as a mod of Half-Life. Team Fortress started off as a mod of Quake. And Alien Swarm started off as a mod of Unreal Tournament. And you've probably heard of Dota. It started off as a mod of Warcraft 3. We've even hired many of the people behind these mods, so in some ways, it's in our DNA. Because of this background, many of our products directly support UGC in one way or another. So we've truly seen the power of it firsthand. We believe that games that embrace UGC will have a leg up on games that don't, simply because the games that use UGC will be able to harness the infinite power of the internet. The community will make those games better, because they'll experiment and iterate at a much faster rate than you or I ever could. They'll find out things that they like and what they don't, and that's actually real data for you to use. A great example of paying attention to what the modding community is doing and reacting accordingly is DayZ. DayZ started off as a mod of Arma 2 back in 2012. Within months of release, hundreds of thousands of players were purchasing Arma 2 just to play the DayZ mod. It was so successful that Bohemia, the developers of Arma 2, hired the original mod creator and decided to make a standalone version. That standalone version was released just a month ago and is currently one of the best-selling games on Steam right now. Now you may be thinking, my game is entirely procedural. There's no place for UGC. Well, I'm here to tell you that it actually can be done. I've seen games where users create new tile sets for those procedural level generators, new monsters to populate those dungeons, and new rules to tweak how those game worlds are created. The point I'm trying to make is that any game can benefit. Even if you have a linear single-player game, there are still surprising ways users will mod it. They will add new stories or chapters. Maybe they'll even change the ending. And quite frankly, if your customers love your game, they're going to mod it. They'll do it for the joy of figuring things out, and because they want to personalize their own experiences with it. So you might as well help out these creators as much as possible and ensure the rest of your players get to reap the benefits. Now, there's a huge variety of ways that games are making use of UGC. To get your creative juices flowing, I'm going to walk through some examples. For now, we're going to look at games that have integrated with the Steam Workshop. The first game to utilize the Steam Workshop was Team Fortress 2 at the end of 2011. This workshop is a little different because the TF2 dev team first lets the community curate the content before deciding what to integrate into the game. So here's how it works. Content creators first upload their files to the Steam Workshop. At that point, the community goes through and votes on which content they want to see in the game. After that, the TF2 dev team then goes through the top-rated content and decides what to download and actually put into the game. Once that is done, those items are made available in the game either by purchasing them or by playing the game itself. Now, TF2 has had hats long before the Steam Workshop came along. In fact, prior to the workshop, we had a scrappy little web portal we called the TF2 Contribute site. Users would upload zip files containing their models or whatever else they wanted to troll us with. And we had an admin view that let us go through all this content and decide what to use. However, there was a big problem. There is no community feedback into what we actually shipped. That's one of the main reasons we built the Steam Workshop, so our customers could tell us what they wanted in their game. As well, back during the Stone Age, contributors were only compensated for their efforts with an in-game item and the satisfaction that they made TF2 a better place. Since we launched the workshop for TF2, we've accepted over 500 items made by the community, and the quality of those items only gets better each and every day. Even better, when we sell one of those community items, as Kyle alluded to, the creators get a share of the revenue. To date, we've paid out millions upon millions of dollars to these contributors. I actually lost count after 10 million. It's really, really much higher. This financial compensation has improved the quality of items in the workshop dramatically and has even led to some people making it their full-time job to create content for the workshop. The second workshop we launched was for the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. The Elder Scrolls series has a long history of modding. However, one of the problems with that was that this content was distributed across multiple websites, and it wasn't really easy for users to get it. They'd have to do a lot of hard work to download the latest version, make sure it's up to date, make sure it didn't conflict, put it in the right place on their hard drive, etc. Needless to say, this wasn't really for the faint of heart. When Skyrim added workshop support, this suddenly brought these mods to the masses. Now every Skyrim player could install a mod with a simple click of a mouse, and they'd be assured that whenever the mod creator made some bug fixes, they'd get them right away. This has been tremendously successful. As of January 1st, there have been over 81.8 million downloads of nearly 20,000 pieces of UGC. I use downloads in quotes because we don't actually count those auto updates. But yeah, that's a minor point. We should really track that stat. These mods range from weapons to characters to quests that give users hours upon hours of new content to explore. And seriously, I don't know another game where you can find a rabbit dressed up as a Dovahkiin or crabs with a top hat and monocle, so it's pretty cool. Don't Starve is one of those games that receives regular updates from its dev team. Back in August, when they integrated with the Steam Workshop and allowed their community to create and share all kinds of UGC, we got all kinds of new things, such as new characters, items, gameplay mods, UI mods, and the ability to personalize the game was one of the nicer implementations we've seen. One really interesting thing that they did was to let users create language packs and tutorials. To date, there are over 10 language packs and over a dozen tutorials for the game. CSGO's workshop started off by allowing users to share the maps that they had created. In the past, when a map maker uploaded their map to a website, it would get copied all over the internet to various fan sites. Then server operators would go to their favorite fan site, download it, and put it into rotation. However, map creators, because there was no centralized place for them to upload their maps, they could never be sure that everybody got the latest and greatest version. So inevitably, this meant that someone was playing with an old, broken copy. The CSGO team solved this quite simply by making sure that the game servers always check with the workshop first to see if there was a new version, and then download it before actually using it. Map makers could then feel free to iterate on their maps, knowing that their customers would always get the latest and greatest content. As of today, over 4,700 maps have been shared with the community for CSGO. The next piece of UGC that the CSGO team tackled were weapon skins. This follows the curated model that the TF2 workshop uses, where creators upload new skins. Then the CSGO dev team decides which ones to ship in the game by looking at the top-rated content. One thing I've learned from this experience is that people really, really love their guns. I mean, really. And they really, really love to paint them. The last time I checked, there were over 20,000 weapon skins uploaded for CSGO. Tripwire has embraced UGC wholeheartedly and let their users share all kinds of content, including maps, characters, and mods. But in a game like Killing Floor, where players have to fend off hordes of zombies, they needed weapons, lots of weapons. So the Tripwire team turned to the community and looked at the top-rated content. They then decided to ship the highest quality weapons as DLC. The best part of that is that the original creators get a slice of each and every piece of DLC sold. This was so successful that Tripwire ended up doing this 3 times, shipping 3 community weapon packs. Having successfully integrated UGC into Killing Floor, Tripwire decided to give similar treatment to Red Orchestra 2. Now, I should mention that creating content can be hard work. As my level designer friends like to tell me, creating maps is the hardest work. So, to incentivize the creation of new, high-quality maps, Tripwire held a contest in 2012 where they awarded over $35,000 worth of cash and prizes. Once the contest was finished, they made the winning maps available to all their players. This first contest was so successful that they did it again in 2013. Portal 2 is a good example of what happens when you make a super easy-to-use level editor embedded in your game and make it available to all of your players. It was so easy, in fact, that even I could make a level, to the chagrin of my level designer friends. It turns out quite a few people found it just as easy as I did. Over 381,000 maps have been shared with the community. So to put that in perspective, if you assume that each map takes about 5 minutes to play and you tried to play them all, it would take you 3.5 years of nonstop playing, no bathroom breaks to complete them all. Of course, there are more being added each and every day, so your chances of doing that are pretty low. We actually had a guy at the very beginning of when the Portal 2 workshop launched try to subscribe to every single map. I think he's probably still playing to this day. One interesting thing to note is that most of the top-rated maps were actually not created by this easy-to-use level editor, but were instead made in Hammer, a tool that our level designers use to create the shipping maps in Portal 2. I'll talk about more of that in a few minutes, and hopefully you'll understand why. The workshop isn't just for games either. The Source Filmmaker, a tool to create high-quality movies, posters, and comics, has also used it to great effect. With hundreds of models, animations, effects, and other pieces of content at their disposal, SFM movie makers have been able to create movies and artwork that have rivaled some of the things we've created ourselves. And last, but not least, there's Gary's Mod. Gary's Mod is what I personally consider the epitome of UGC. It started off as a mod of the source engine, and its seemingly sole purpose is to create more UGC. At this point, I can't tell if it's reached sentience, but I know that it's actually reproducing. Everything a player does in Gary's Mod seems to create more content to share with other players. Players have created over 250,000 pieces of content, ranging from new game modes to new characters to freaking roller coasters. I could probably go on and on about how people are integrating their games with UGC, but I'll leave some of that fun detective work for you. There are currently 72 products using the Steam Workshop, all in interesting ways, so there's plenty to look at and get inspired by. All right, you guys are excited, I can tell, and you want to get going. But maybe you have some nagging concerns about the amount of work it will take, and you're not sure when to get started. So, when should you start? Well, I'd say start right now. Is everybody typing? Let's see. Okay, wait till lunch. It's never too early to start, and we're happy to help. So now I'm going to give you a short sales pitch on the Steam Workshop. I love UGC, and I've dedicated over 10 years of my life in the game industry to it. I know that it can seem daunting to try to do this all on your own. Well, I'm here to tell you, you're not alone. And you won't have to do everything, because we've built some tools to help you out. You can think of the Steam Workshop as a set of tools that make it easy to share user-generated content with your community. It has all the things you can imagine such a system having, such as the ability to search, filter, rate, sort, all that sort of stuff. As well, we'll take care of all the hosting, management, infrastructure, etc. So instead of you having to wake up at 2 a.m. because the servers are down, it'll probably be me waking up at 2 a.m. This will let you focus on all the cool stuff, how UGC actually interacts with your game. Okay, so where do you start? It's easy to think that you have to support all kinds of UGC and polish up your tools and write a bunch of documentation. But in reality, you should just start simple. Focus on one type of UGC and expand from there. Release your tools in whatever state they're in. As a developer, I know there's some pride on the line there, but it's okay, really. It's better to get your community started and see where you actually have to do work to support them. If you have a hard-to-use tool that you use internally, I wouldn't worry too much about polishing it up and making it easy to use. Going back to the example of the 42 level editor, where we made a really polished in-game version, it was pretty powerful, but not nearly as powerful as Hammer, the tool we normally use to create maps. And it was Hammer, as you remember, that the community used to create the top-rated content for Portal 2. And I don't think there's anyone out there that would argue Hammer was easy to use. One thing that worked really well for us on TF2 was enabling users to upload zip files containing anything they wanted. We asked for models, and they gave us models, but they also gave us gameplay fixes, tuning things, new kill icons, and much more. They were basically telling us what things they wanted to be able to change in the game. If you don't have time to work on your tools, it's okay to rely on third-party tools. Back in another life, when I worked at Maxis on The Sims 2, I volunteered to work with modders who were creating community items for the game. One of their tools, called the Sims Package Editor, totally freaking blew my mind, seriously. Here was a tool that they had created with very little help from us that actually rivaled some of the tools we had created internally. I mean, think about that, right? Like, you're spending your entire life working on tools, helping your scripters and things like that, and these guys did it just by reverse engineering your data. So with that in mind, I'd say just give them everything. Let them have all the resources you use to make your content. It can only make the content they create better. And in reality, they're probably going to extract it from your game files anyways, so you might as well help them get started by giving it to them and explaining how you do things. We released the source code for many of our tools, so instead of modders having to spend time reverse engineering things and looking at the data, you can give them a head start so they can improve the tools for you. Okay, so what if you don't even have documentation, or it's really bad, like some of ours? It's okay. Ship what you have. Create a wiki, or direct users to a place where they can create documentation for you. They'll probably do this anyways, but you can make sure that everyone is on the same page by centralizing that content and supporting it as much as possible. Anything you can do to get the community on the road to making higher quality content faster is worth it. The most important thing is to get started. After that, you can learn what your content creators want to do and act accordingly. You'll need to listen to them and figure out what they're trying to do. Look for ways to make their lives easier so that they can focus on creating the best content possible for your game. Again, when we first started with UGC for TF2, remember that we let users upload a zip file containing anything they wanted. So they would upload assets made in Maya, 3ds Studio Max, or any number of modeling packages. Eventually, we decided that it was in our best interest to build an import tool to save us some time. But it wasn't necessary to the success of UGC in the very beginning. And I'd argue that the opportunity cost of letting customers give us UGC early was much better than the cost of waiting a few years to polish up our tools. Once you have one type of UGC supported, it's easy to expand to other types. Go through methodically and see what other kinds of content your users want to customize. And maybe eventually you'll catch up with Gary's mod, but probably not. In parallel, you may also want to make the lives of your UGC consumers easier. One thing that quite a few games do is expose the discovery of the best content directly in their game. For example, in Don't Starve, they list out the top mods in their UI, making it super easy to explore the best content. They also allow users to manage their mods in-game, so it all feels like one seamless experience. If you know that a user has used a piece of content, you should ask them to evaluate its quality. For example, in Portal 2, after a user completes a map, we ask them to rate it. This ensures that we capture the user's feedback, which in turn enables us to figure out what the best content is, and then we can expose it to as many players as possible. All right, so we've covered the basics, but wait, there's more. There's more to think about, and that's how to encourage the creation of quality content for your game. There are many ways to do this, but what we've found is to get the best quality content, you'll want to provide some sort of financial compensation. In the very beginning, remember that TF2 modelers created hats because of their love for the game and hats, and the fact that they'd receive a special in-game item, and of course status in the community. Well, once we introduced the workshop and customers started buying their items and creators started receiving paychecks, the quality of the items went through the roof. One way to provide financial compensation is to run contests, as we talked about earlier with Red Orchestra 2. This works well on an intermittent basis, but it's something you'll have to organize each and every time. Another way to do this is by bundling up the best content and selling it as DLC, just like Killing Floor did. And of course, as you probably know by now, you can sell the items in your game like TF2 and Dota 2 do, with the creators receiving a share of the revenue. If you do this through the Steam Workshop, we'll take care of paying all the creators and all the tax mumbo jumbo for you. One key thing to understand here is that the creators are compensated in proportion to the value that they've created for customers. In simpler terms, if we ship 10 hats, customers vote with their dollars and tell us and the creators what they like best. After you've thought about properly incentivizing and compensating content creators, you should look at the ecosystem that surrounds them. Most likely there are websites where they congregate or third-party tools that they use that you'll also want to support. We've formalized this on the Steam Workshop with a feature we call service providers. Basically, content creators can choose from a whitelist of these service providers to tell us which ones help them the most. Then, for every item that they sell, 5% of Steam's share of the revenue is directed instead towards these chosen service providers. It's pretty much a win-win for everyone. Content creators are supporting the service providers that help them the most. The service providers are getting more resources to improve their tools and services, and your game gets better content because the whole ecosystem is improving. All right, we're almost done, thank God. But in reality, we've only really just started exploring user-generated content. The type of UGC that your game can consume is just the tip of the iceberg. Players will find all kinds of ways to create content related to your game. And I'm going to go over a few of my favorites right now. They're going to take screenshots to capture the beauty of your games. And of course, to record their most memorable moments. They'll make movies to tell new stories about your characters and universe. Some of them rivaling the quality of the content that you make yourself. Your users will create some amazing artwork. Some of it the result of contests, such as this winning piece for Tomb Raider. And some just because they love hats. The community has this obsession with hats. I don't really understand it. You know it's really bad when you dream about hats and you wake up and you see everyone with a hat. That's when you know you have a problem. They'll write guides to help their fellow players. And walkthroughs. And wikis. They'll even cover your music. And share it with millions of other players. And some will even create new music inspired by your game. They'll cosplay as your characters. no matter what the cost. And they'll even write poetry. As you can see, UGC is more than just the content that your game can consume. It's content that inspires people, that gives them choices in how they play and perceive your game. Some of it may seem silly or not that valuable, but I can assure you that if your community is taking the time to create it, then they find it valuable. You'll want to find ways to encourage and foster all kinds of UGC. In the same way that we saw the quality of in-game content increase once we started compensating creators, we're sure the same thing will happen for all this other kind of UGC as well. And of course, we'd be happy to share all this content with your community as well. So I ripped through that. To wrap things up, hopefully you've taken at least two things away from this talk. One, that UGC is incredibly valuable for your game, and I personally think freaking awesome. And two, that you should start supporting it right now, especially since I'm about to end. Because your community will come up with things you've never dreamed of. And if you're anything like me, they'll inspire you in so many ways, just like you have inspired them. Thank you. So I finished early, so we're going to do a Q&A session now. We're also going to do a breakout session in room 611 at 4 o'clock for any game-specific questions. So if you could reserve more like questions that everybody could benefit from, that'd be great. And I think people are running around with mics. Yep.
So how do you keep yourself from being ripped off by the community? Like if you release a source code and they release it themselves to outside of Steam or whatever.
We just don't worry about that. We always believe, like source code in itself isn't the value, it's really the developers, right? Like you guys have the knowledge, you guys have the expertise, right? Like, you know, Half-Life source code went out there. That didn't stop Half-Life from being released, right? And that's Quake source code is out there. That didn't stop Quake from being successful. Of course, he released it years later. But you get my point. Source code doesn't have that value in and of itself. It's actually the people that provide the value, right? It's like it's your ideas, it's your execution of those ideas that really matter.
Yes. I have a question about, is there a conflict between having, say, full access mod support and supporting a robust microtransaction economy? Like, if you allow team workers to be super moddable, and I can just make any hat I want, just clone it and make it for free, would that undermine your microtransaction economy? And do you feel there's a tension between do you feel like enforcing a good, healthy item economy requires you to nerf modding in any way at all, or what's the tension? How do you feel about that?
I don't really feel like it nerfs modding. I mean, there are servers out there that allow people to have any hat and things like that. We think the value is that when you go on a game server, people know that you've earned this hat, right? And if you're the only one that can see it, that doesn't provide value because that hat is kind of status, and it's also you personalizing your gameplay experience, right? You want people to see that you have this top hat with, you know, crazy ass effects flying over it. So we really haven't viewed that. We view, it's like if people are trying to do it, there's probably an opportunity for us to help, right? So.
So there's the standard kind of vanilla integration of the workshop that a lot of games have done, but then there's what you were talking about where the content contributors could actually get a share of the revenue, like in Dota 2 and TF2. I couldn't see anything in documentation that actually covered making that jump from just having the regular workshop where everyone can contribute and there's no money involved.
Yeah.
Next level.
So we definitely support it. That's my bad. I'll write up some documentation tomorrow. We've heard some interest from some people, and we definitely, it is supported. I just need to write up the documentation and things like that. So yes, thank you for reminding me. So come to the breakout session. Make sure I get your business card so that we can get in touch and make sure that documentation is there for you.
Is there any on the legal side with the copyrights? Like, how do you monitor all the hundreds of items that are coming in? And you can probably guess whether or not somebody ripped off somebody's artwork. And then it sounds like a very complicated process to verify everything. Otherwise, you risk exposing somebody else's work.
Yeah, so this is a problem with UGC in general, not just on Steam, right? Like, this is a problem on YouTube or anything that has user-generated content. We have a DMCA process. So if you're a content creator and you see that somebody's uploaded your content, you can file a DMCA notice, and then we'll follow that process through, right? And the community actually does a pretty good job of moderating the content themselves. So if they see that somebody else has ripped off a mod that they actually know the original creator, they'll downvote that thing to hell. And they'll also report it. So we also have a reporting mechanism. And once a piece of content is reported enough, it just gets banned, right? So we have a lot of mechanisms to try to alleviate some of those concerns.
So I know you discussed like Skyrim as an example of a game that was released not just on Steam, but still applies itself to UGC very well through the workshop. So I guess my question would be, for games that are similar in that respect, who do want to work with the workshop, but have other portals that are frequented often, do you have any suggestions for how to get people excited for Steam other than just cross-promotion?
Okay, let me see if I understand your question. If you have a game that has other portals that have UGC, is that right?
We actually, we have a web portal that people play our game on more than Steam, but our Steam users are very engaged, very interested in us doing something like this. And what I don't want is the alienation of those players to feel like they should play on Steam in order to use that UGC, in order to be a part of that community, unless they want to. I was wondering if you have any anecdotes or anything along the lines of that.
Okay. So Skyrim still has a really active user base and mods that are outside of the Steam Workshop, right? So the Steam Workshop made it so that the mods could be brought to basically any Steam player, right? It's really easy to install a mod, etc. But there are other third-party websites, right? Like Nexus is a really big one, right? They support their mods. I mean, I'm all for modding. I'm not for a monopoly of UGC on Steam, don't get me wrong. So I think it's perfectly healthy to have other places for users to download UGC. And we've had some partners express the same concerns, and we don't have any issue with it, right? So.
Yeah, so a lot of times when you release a game and you continue to update it, sometimes those update will break mods. Do you have any general advice as to how to minimize the negative effects of that?
What we've seen partners do in the past is actually they've created beta branches of their games, and then they've invited those top modders, right, to test out the game, basically, because these are the guys that are providing so much value to your game. You want to make sure that their mods work, because it would really suck, you release an update and everybody's favorite mods broke. So that's one way to do it. That was pretty successful.
Hi. Do you have any tips on getting internal artists to buy into UGC more? And like sometimes if a community member makes an item and they get more royalties than the artist would get in salary, they get jealous. And do you have any tips for handling when you get into those situations?
So I'll answer the first part of your question. So we did have this exact problem on Dota, right? We have tremendously skilled artists, right? And then they're like, well, we could just make all this content. But when we actually started the workshop for Dota 2, they realized that the community was creating such incredibly beautiful things. It's like as artists, they just really love that. And there's always room for them to do things as well, right? So like they'd create the characters, set the art style, and it's, they're essentially being an art director to the rest of the community. As for the financial compensation part of your question, I think that's really up to you guys. We make sure that our artists are compensated very well, so.
I'm wondering if UGC is in some way giving up the visual aesthetic vision of your game that you first established. It is essentially giving up that control and giving it to the players as their responsibility. And how do you sort of contend with like people in my virtual world running around with floppy swords and things that look terrible and I guess ruin it for everybody else?
So we did have that concern with Team Fortress. Maybe some people will think that we've disregarded that concern, but and also Dota. So that's why I said we have a curated model for the workshop, right? The community is voting and telling us what things they want in the game, but we still have the ability to say, well, this is way too sci-fi for Dota, right? This isn't going to work. We know you guys like it, but there's enough people that don't like it that maybe we'll decide not to put it in the game, right? To some extent, it is giving up control of what your game originally was, but I think that's okay. This is what your players want, right? I mean, not to say that you should give them everything they want, but if there's enough people saying, I want your game to have hats and mustaches, you as a creator should help them out, right? So I don't really see a problem with it. Some people may take some time getting used to it, especially if they're used to having tight control of the art direction of their game or their gameplay and things like that. But like I said, people are gonna mod your game anyways. When TF2 first started off, people made hats long before we put them in the game. That was actually where we got the idea, so you can blame those guys. So, yep.
Hi. I found that, at least in my community, people tend to go crazy at a particular fixed rate that doesn't seem to change over time. So what do you do about security of add-ons? Like if, a game supports full scripting that has TCP objects and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What if somebody, decides to update their mod that deletes everybody's save game or something? And this will happen, at least to me. So, how's that handled?
So as the programmer who's done that sort of things, I've tried to sandbox those things. Like you want to give modders as much control as possible, but then not let them affect the other users in a detrimental way. So like if you use Lua, that can totally be sandboxed so that people can't write to the hard drive or delete files, right? To some extent, if you don't want to go that far, your community will also help you curate that content. So the upvote and downvote button are really powerful things, right? They'll say, this thing deletes all my save games. Unfortunately, some guy had to experience that in the first place as the canary in the coal mine. But that's a way to let the rest of the community know that, hey, don't use this mod, right? But as a programmer, I would probably try to sandbox that thing anyways.
I have a concern over the long term. Right now, you have, like you said, about 70 games using UGC. And so say your talk is very successful today, and 2 years from now, you have 1,000 games requesting the use of all these people who probably are a very small portion of your actual players for using their services, and especially then the elite group inside that, which actually produces very high quality content. What happens when you have 1,000 games, 2,000 games, 3,000 games, all struggling for the same little group of people? I a little worry about that over the long term. Now, as long as there's a gold rush, but long term, I'm a little concerned.
I guess I'm not that concerned, mostly because there's like 7 billion people in the world. There's a lot of great content creators out there, and we're only tapping a tiny, tiny portion of them for TF2 and Dota and CSGO, right?
Back in the day of the pinball construction set, it was so successful, it spawned lots and lots of construction sets.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, they got really, really sad. Even though they got more technically interesting and better kind of like genres and such, the modders just burned out.
I can't speak to that example directly. Just to address your other question a little more. What we're finding is that when we launched Dota 2, Dota 2's workshop, suddenly all the TF2 artists didn't just migrate over, right? So we didn't lose all those artists. We actually gained more artists. What happened is the whole ecosystem is growing. People are starting to take it seriously. We get professional artists making things, and as the whole ecosystem improves, there's going to be more and more people taking this seriously and thinking, hey, I could actually make some great content for my favorite games and actually make some money off of it. So some of the TF2 artists did go over and make Dota 2 items, but what they ended up doing is still making TF2 items because that's their favorite game. So I think you obviously have to have a great game that draws your users in, because these are the guys that are going to start off playing your games and then deciding they want to personalize it, right? There are always going to be the professionals that are going to go and try to seek out the best place where they can use their talents on the workshop. But we're talking about people that also want to do this because they love it. I think we had time for one last question, so.
You mentioned like contests and stuff for maps.
Yep.
What is another good way to monetize maps that don't segment your community?
I didn't mention it in the talk, but what CSGO did was they took some of the maps and put them on their official servers. So these official servers are really, really super fast. They're all over the world. You can always get these community maps for free and play them locally or play them on your own server. But if you wanted to play on the official servers, you had to buy like Operation Payback, right? That's what we called it. So you bought a little pass that enabled you to play on the official servers on these community maps. And what we did was gave 100% of the proceeds from Operation Payback to those map creators. So that's another way you could compensate map creators for creating great content for your game.
Thank you.
Okay. The guy said I'm out of time, so thank you very much. Please come to the breakout session at 4 o'clock.